Ever thought being alone for too long just makes you a little bored? Think again. Throughout history, scientists and sometimes governments with way too much free time have locked people up in silent rooms, floated them in tanks, or even stuffed monkeys into steel boxes, all in the name of science. The result? Hallucinations, breakdowns, and stories that sound less like psychology and more like a horror movie script. So buckle up, because today we're diving into the most disturbing psychological experiments on isolation where curiosity crossed the line into pure nightmare fuel. Number 9. The sensory deprivation tank. Back in the 1950s, neuroscientist John C. Lilly had a very strange idea. What if we take away literally everything a person can feel, light, sound, even the sensation of their own body, and just see what happens? So he built the sensory deprivation tank, a pitch black, soundproof tank filled with warm salt water, no phone, no Netflix, not even a squeaky floorboard to keep you company, just you and your brain slowly turning against you. At first, volunteers reported being relaxed. Some even compared it to floating in space, but after hours inside, things got weird. People began to lose track of time, hallucinate colors and shapes, or even hear phantom voices whispering. Imagine thinking you signed up for science, but instead you've landed in a low-budget horror movie. Lilly believed this altered state of consciousness could help unlock the mysteries of the human mind, and in a way, he was right. The tanks later influenced research into meditation, creativity, and brain function. But there's a darker side too. Governments and militaries reportedly toyed with similar methods for psychological torture, because nothing messes you up faster than your own imagination on overdrive. Today, you can actually pay money to climb into one of these tanks at trendy wellness spas. They market it as deep relaxation or mindful floating. But let's be honest, if John Lilly told you in the 1950s, hey, want to hallucinate shadow people in the dark, you'd probably run. So whether you call it therapy, science, or self-inflicted nightmare fuel, the sensory deprivation tank proves one thing: left completely alone, your brain is both your best friend and your scariest enemy. Number 8. University of Montreal, 1950s. So, in the 1950s, some Canadian researchers at the University of Montreal decided to ask a simple question: what happens if you lock someone in a completely white, silent room and wait, spoiler, nothing good? Funded by the CIA's infamous MK Ultra program, because of course it was, volunteers were placed in small cubicles where everything was white walls, floor, even their clothing, no clocks, no sounds, no colors. Basically, imagine living inside a blank sheet of printer paper. At first, participants thought, okay, this is boring but fine. But after a couple of days, boredom mutated into something far more disturbing. They lost their sense of time, couldn't focus, and began experiencing vivid hallucinations, flashes of light, phantom figures, even imaginary dogs wandering around the room. Some described it as their brain inventing TV shows just to stay entertained. The scariest part: psychotic symptoms, paranoia, extreme anxiety, and disorientation appeared after only a few days. When asked to do simple mental tasks like solving puzzles or remembering words, many completely broke down. The human brain, it turns out, desperately needs stimulation. Take that away and it basically rebels. Why was the CIA interested? They wanted to know if sensory isolation could be used for mind control, interrogation, or breaking down prisoners. Classic CIA hobby, right? Most volunteers were never quite the same afterward, and the experiment is now infamous as one of the most disturbing examples of psychological research gone too far. So, next time you complain about having too many notifications, just remember, silence and nothingness might actually be worse. At least Instagram doesn't make you hallucinate dogs in your living room. Number 7. Harry Harlow's Pit of Despair. If you think human isolation studies were dark, wait until you meet Harry Harlow, a psychologist who apparently looked at baby monkeys and thought, what if we ruin their lives for science? In the 1970s, Harlow designed a sinister-looking steel contraption he charmingly named the Pit of Despair. Imagine a tall, narrow, stainless steel box with slippery walls so the monkeys couldn't climb out. Into this device, he placed baby rhesus monkeys completely alone, No mother, no playmates, no comfort, just them and the void. At first, the monkeys cried, reached out, and clung to the sides, but after days turned into weeks, their behavior shifted in disturbing ways. They stopped moving, curled into balls, refused to eat, and in some cases simply wasted away. Many displayed what Harlow himself described as profound despair. In plain terms, they lost the will to live. The experiment became a brutal illustration of what total social isolation does to a living being. It strips away joy, motivation, even the basic instinct to survive. Some monkeys, after months inside, never recovered socially. When reunited with other monkeys, they were withdrawn, unable to bond, and sometimes aggressive. Harlow claimed the work highlighted the importance of love and social contact, something most of us could have figured out without traumatizing primates. Unsurprisingly, the pit of despair is now infamous as one of the cruelest experiments in psychology. So next time you think your room feels a little lonely, just be glad you're not stuck in a steel despair box designed by a man who really needed a hug himself. Number 6. The Soviet isolation experiments. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union wasn't just racing the Americans to the moon, they were also running creepy experiments to figure out what happens when you lock people up in tiny boxes for weeks. You know, for science. Cosmonauts were expected to spend long stretches in space, so Soviet researchers decided to test the limits of the human mind under isolation. Volunteers, or let's be honest, volunteers were sealed inside small, windowless chambers with controlled air, food rations, and about as much excitement as watching paint dry, in the dark. At first, participants tried to stay productive reading, exercising, maybe daydreaming about borscht, but soon the cracks began to show. Sleep schedules fell apart. Some reported vivid hallucinations, like hearing voices or seeing lights where none existed. Anxiety spiked, mood swung violently, and paranoia crept in. Imagine living in a never-ending episode of Big Brother, except you're the only contestant. The studies revealed that even trained, disciplined individuals quickly suffer when deprived of natural light, human contact, and variety. After just a couple of weeks, many participants experienced depression, irrational fears, and what today we'd call serious anxiety disorders. On one hand, the research did contribute to understanding psychological resilience in space travel. On the other, it highlighted a disturbing truth: humans simply aren't built to thrive in solitary boxes, whether on Earth or orbiting it. So the next time you complain about being stuck in a small apartment, remember, at least you have Netflix, neighbors, and maybe even a window. The Soviet test subjects would have killed for a single houseplant. Number 5. The British White Room Experiments. In the 1950s, British researchers apparently asked themselves, what if we take everything interesting out of a room and see how long a person lasts? Thus, the White Room experiments were born, minimalism taken to a terrifying extreme. Volunteers and sometimes prisoners were placed inside chambers where literally everything was white walls, floor, ceiling, even their clothes. The lighting was constant, the sound was deadened, and there was nothing, no smell, no objects, no change. Basically, it was the world's worst Airbnb. At first, participants reported being bored, but boredom quickly spiraled into something much darker. With no external stimulation, the brain started to invent its own entertainment, vivid hallucinations. People saw patterns swirling on blank walls, faces emerging from nowhere, and even entire scenes playing out like dream sequences. Some described hearing phantom music or voices, despite the room being silent. The longer they stayed, the more unbearable it became. Many reported actual physical pain like skin-crawling sensations or headaches, proving that the absence of stimuli can hurt just as much as overload. Panic attacks, paranoia, and total mental breakdowns were not uncommon. Most volunteers begged to leave long before the study's end. Those who toughed it out often came out shaken, describing the experience as losing their grip on reality, which, honestly, sounds like the kind of thing you'd say after accidentally binge-watching British TV for 48 hours straight. The takeaway: human beings need variety, sound, color, and connection. Without them, the mind doesn't just get restless, it starts to fall apart. So the next time someone suggests redecorating your room all white for the aesthetic, maybe throw in a plant for your sanity's sake. Number 4. Chinese Cultural Revolution isolation. Not all isolation experiments came from science labs, some came straight out of history's darkest chapters. During the Chinese Cultural Revolution, 1966-1976, political prisoners often found themselves in what were chillingly called silent rooms. These weren't fancy research chambers with clipboards and lab coats, just bare cells designed to erase a person's sense of self. In these rooms, prisoners were cut off from nearly everything: no light changes, no conversation, no books, not even the chance to mutter to themselves without punishment. They were forced to sit, eat, and sleep in silence, surrounded only by the endless void of their own thoughts. And if you've ever been left alone too long with your thoughts, you know that's where the real horror begins. Reports describe prisoners developing severe psychological damage, anxiety, paranoia, uncontrollable weeping, and complete mental collapse. Some experienced permanent trauma that lasted long after their release, unable to reintegrate into society. Others broke down so badly they confessed to crimes they hadn't even committed, just to escape the silence. Unlike formal psychological studies, there was no ethics board, no follow-up care, no consent. This was isolation as punishment, weaponized into a form of social control. In a grim way, it acted like a massive forced social experiment, proving on a national scale how destructive silence and separation can be. So while Western scientists were locking students in white rooms for a few days, prisoners in China were living through years of state-enforced nothingness. It's a stark reminder sometimes the scariest psychological experiments aren't the ones in research papers, they're the ones inflicted on real people, in real history. Number 3. NASA isolation studies. Back in the 1960s and 70s, NASA faced a big problem. How do we make sure astronauts don't lose their minds when trapped in a metal can for months? Their solution: lock a bunch of pilots and volunteers in sealed rooms on Earth and see what happens. Ah yes, classic science. These experiments simulated the conditions of space-tiny, windowless chambers, limited communication, recycled air, and not much to do besides stare at the same walls and the same crewmates. It was basically a cosmic road trip, without the road, snacks, or scenery. At first, things went smoothly. People read books, exercised, and played cards, but as the days stretched into weeks, cracks started to form. Participants reported time distortion, losing track of whether it was day or night. Stress levels skyrocketed. Small annoyances like someone chewing too loudly turned into major conflicts. Imagine being trapped in a tin can with your most annoying roommate, and you'll get the idea. NASA discovered that prolonged isolation caused extreme psychological strain. Some volunteers became withdrawn, others snapped at their teammates, and group dynamics often spiraled into conflict. In short, when humans are boxed up together for too long, it doesn't take much for tempers to ignite. Despite the breakdowns, these studies gave NASA vital insights. They helped shape astronaut training, team selection, and even the design of space habitats. Because if you're going to send people to the moon or Mars, you'd better know how to keep them from going completely stir-crazy. So the next time you argue with your family during a long car ride, remember you're basically reenacting a NASA isolation study, except you get to roll down the window. Number 2. Donald Hebb's isolation study. In the 1950s, psychologist Donald Hebb at McGill University had an idea: what if we pay students to do nothing? Surely that'll be harmless. Spoiler, it was not harmless. The setup sounded simple enough. Volunteers, mostly broke college students, were placed in tiny cubicles with almost zero sensory input. They wore padded gloves to dull touch, translucent goggles so they couldn't see clearly, and headphones to block out sound. Essentially, they were paid to sit in the world's most boring spa. At first, the students thought it was easy money, but after a couple of days, the fun, money-for-nothing vibe took a sharp turn. Participants started to lose concentration, unable to solve simple problems or even read. Then came the real kicker hallucinations. Some saw flashes of light or geometric patterns, others reported vivid images like squirrels marching in formation, or entire scenes playing in their minds like a movie. The line between dreams and waking reality blurred, and panic began to set in. Most students quit the study within 48 hours. Despite being promised decent pay, the conclusion was chilling. Even short-term sensory deprivation can unravel the mind faster than anyone expected. Hebb's research was groundbreaking but also unsettling. His findings later influenced military and intelligence programs, particularly in developing psychological interrogation techniques. Yes, the same experiment that gave us hallucinating squirrels also laid the groundwork for methods many now classify as torture. So, next time you think sitting quietly in your room all day sounds peaceful, remember too much, nothing can make your brain start inventing an army of squirrels, and that's not on anyone's vision board. Number 1. Real prison solitary confinement studies. Up to this point, we've talked about experiments with tanks, white rooms, and hallucinating squirrels, but the most disturbing study of all time isn't in a lab, it's happening in real prisons, every single day. Solitary confinement has been called a living laboratory of suffering. Imagine being locked in a tiny cell, 22 or 24 hours a day, with little or no human contact, no conversations, no sunshine, no sense of time passing. It's like someone hit pause on your life, except your brain keeps spiraling. Research on prisoners shows a terrifying pattern: psychosis, crushing depression, and skyrocketing suicide rates. Some inmates begin to hear voices, see figures that aren't there, or lose their grip on reality entirely. Others sink into deep apathy, unable to think or feel much of anything. Psychologists have compared the effects to slow psychological death. And unlike short-term lab experiments, solitary confinement can last months, years, even decades. That means the damage is often permanent: PTSD, cognitive decline, and complete inability to reintegrate into society after release. What makes this especially haunting is that solitary confinement isn't some fringe practice, it's a mainstream part of prison systems worldwide. In other words, humanity has been running a massive, uncontrolled experiment on thousands of people for centuries. So while the other experiments on this list ended when subjects tapped out or researchers packed up, this one has no tidy conclusion. For many inmates, the experiment only ends when their sanity or their life does. Kind of makes you wonder, when we lock people away to keep society safe, are we actually creating more broken minds than we prevent? Now that's a disturbing research question. From quirky lab tanks to the grim reality of prison cells, isolation experiments prove one thing: extreme loneliness can be downright destructive. Science has a funny way of shining a flashlight into the darkest corners of the human mind, sometimes revealing truths we'd rather not see. And it always leaves us with one big question: where do we draw the ethical line? If you enjoyed this dive into the eerie side of psychology, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more strange and unsettling stories.